Why is it so hard to break free from patterns even when you know that they are holding you back and not supportive? Why is it so hard to break free from patterns even when you know that they are holding you back and not supportive? Let's dive into that today. So, I got a question that talks about, I'll just read the question: patterns, patterns, patterns. So, when one is aware of a pattern, I'm assuming the strategy is to interrupt it somehow. At 55, whilst having awareness around patterns, they seem hard to break. Self betrayal and lack of self compassion abounds. So, this is not the first question or the type of question about how do we let go of patterns. And I want to go into it because there's so many different layers. And so, one, uh, written response isn't going to necessarily help. So, I wanted to make this much more complex to show the different angles that we take breaking patterns and how we have to have self compassion, how that's incredibly important to this journey and this process, or we're going to stay stuck in the same cycles over and over and over. And so, first and foremost, we have to recognize the patterns. And when you see a pattern, now it's what do you do with that pattern? How do we break it? Because a lot of times, what happens, we're so mean to ourselves, we're so hateful to who we are, we're so judgmental about the position that we're in today because we want to be somewhere else. We want to be at a different level. We want to be in a different space. And so when it comes to breaking patterns, you have to come at it with a lot of self-compassion, of non-judgment. And so when you look at the things that you're doing over and over and over, what happens most often is we judge it and we say, I wish I wasn't like this anymore. Or why do I keep doing this? I'm aware of this pattern, but I keep falling into its trap. So first and foremost, we have to not judge it, because the judgment is typically what pushes us over the edge into the spiral. And now we are spiraling because now we just wish we weren't like this anymore, instead of just looking at it and saying, but why am I still like this? Right. So that's a pattern breaker right there. Why is this still here? So why does this still keep coming up for me? And then a second part of that is, why am I still reacting so hard to it? Because I want to really say, first and foremost, that patterns sometimes don't actually go away. They don't dissolve completely. They can still be very present, but it's our relationship to that pattern that really is what is important. So I'll give a brief example here. So I'm in the process, I have a coaching certification where I certify coaches to become coaches. I am in the process of going through accreditation to get that course next level, right? So all my students can be accredited. Okay, going through that process. And through that, I also have to go through accreditation. So if you've watched me for long, you know the story that I had, that I wasn't smart enough, that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't capable. That was my narrative for so long. I always thought, oh my gosh, they're just going to find out that I'm not good enough. And with that thought, I believed it. And with that belief became a really big visceral feeling. And that's when I would stop myself. That's when I would feel this punch in my gut and I would say, oh, I'm not going to move forward, or oh my gosh, I can't do this. And then my thought spiral happened. And then my self sabotage came after, right? So if we kind of break that down, it was an external event. There was the pattern of me thinking that I wasn't good enough, and then the pattern of me responding to that thought with a belief, and then the pattern of me taking action of running away or pulling back or self-sabotaging in one way or another. Right? So that's what would happen. So, okay, so now I'm in the certification or accreditation process, and I got an email back, and it's like, okay, you're going to have to do, it was a lot of stuff. I have to do a lot of stuff to get this accredited, as I should. And one of them, it's going to be about 4 hours of just like intense interview and then just different type of coaching calls and things like that. And my brain immediately said, oh, they're going to find out that you're not as good as you say you are. And then I just started laughing because I thought, oh my gosh, after all these years, after all this work, that thought still comes up first. Now, I don't believe that thought whatsoever, right? I will challenge that thought all day long. I'm going to knock those things out of the park when I do those calls and those interviews. And I believe that to my core. And so what would happen typically, and what most people do, is they hear that thought and then they think, oh, I haven't changed. Oh, it's still here. It's still relevant. But that's not true. It's our relationship to the thought. Thoughts don't just disappear. right? They don't just go away. If they are created, they're likely going to come back. It's a relationship to the thought and what we do with the thought when it arises. That is a huge pattern breaker. So I hope that makes that piece really clear, is that we're not trying to completely omit these thoughts that we have, because we're not in control of our thoughts, but we do have control over our relationship to that thought, the belief we have in that thought. And that's where we can break the pattern. So you can't break the pattern of what thought initially comes up to an external event. For me, the first thought was that. And then I just laughed and I moved on. And I didn't have any reaction. I didn't have any belief behind it. There was no emotion attached to it. And that's what we're working for. But I think this is a really common misconception, and I think it gets preached a lot, is that we can control those thoughts and that we can remove them. And that's not what we're trying to do. Now they will lessen and lessen and lessen and lessen, right? They won't be as prevalent in your life, but they no longer become your operating system. They can just literally flit through your mind and you don't pay it any, you don't give it a second thought, right? It's that second thought that counts and what we do with it. Okay, so we find these patterns, we understand the patterns, we know it's there, we see the thought. Now, what do we do with it? So, again, in that example for me, I saw that relationship to that thought and I thought, that's funny. That's not even relevant to me anymore. Now what? So that's what you have to do with yourself too. You can't judge it. So I didn't judge myself and think, oh my God, of course, Kayla, here you are again, judging, or here you are again, not believing in yourself. And what I did is you just see that thought for what it is, which is a thought. Now break the pattern. Okay, so now how do we break the pattern? So after we are aware of the trigger to the pattern to the action, now we can say, what do we do differently? What can I do differently? How can I change my relationship with this? Well, now you actually have to challenge that belief. Now you have to say, do I actually believe that? Do I have to believe what's going through my mind that's creating the action that then I'm self-sabotaging? What is it that I no longer want to be doing? Do I really believe that I'm not good enough? Do I really believe that I always betray myself? Do I not have enough compassion with myself to say, you've done the best you can? So you challenge that thought. And this is where we get into my method that I created called the TRM, the trigger response method, because all of this is made up in that. We've reduced it to 5 steps so I can make it easier for you. So we go all the way from trigger to response. And I'm going to talk about those different aspects in here, but I'll drop a link in the comments so you guys can have access to a freebie that will walk you through the TRM. And it's a really powerful aspect because you're looking at your trigger. Now we're going all the way to our responses behind it and what is in between there, right? So you have your trigger. Now you have your emotion that comes up with it. Now, this is the piece that's oftentimes missing. And this is why I truly believe people do not break patterns, is because they do not understand what they're gaining from that pattern. There is something called the payoff in there, and you are always, always, always gaining something from every action you do. If you didn't gain something, you wouldn't be doing it. Now, oftentimes this is a perceived payoff. You don't understand why it's there, and you would even challenge it. And you would say, most of the time when I say this to people, they say, I don't get anything in return. And that's where I challenge back and I say, well, you would have stopped doing it a long time ago if it wasn't feeding something within you. If it wasn't feeding your victimhood, if it wasn't feeding your belief that you are not capable, if it wasn't feeding your belief that you are not someone who can be rich, if it wasn't feeding your belief saying that, oh, you're not someone who can have a successful business, that is truly where you're at. And so you are gaining something in between it and or from it. And if you were not, you wouldn't be doing it. I promise you that. So you have to understand what you're gaining from it. And this is a really big space that we go into judgment as well, because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm being the victim. Well, of course you are. It served you in one way or another. It's kept you safe and kept you small. That's the ego saying, okay, stay here, stay put. It's safer here. It's safer in this inaction. It's safer in this self-doubt. It's safer in this space. But you're ready to let that go. And I know you're ready to let that go if you've made it this far into the video. And so really allow yourself not to judge what comes up and just see it for what it is. What is this showing me? How can I see this for what it is and move past it? Where did it come from? Was this a borrowed belief from somebody else? Is this conditioning? Is this story? Is this thought that I've operated my entire life off of? Is this somebody else's belief that they projected onto me and I adopted as my own? You have to question and challenge it. So, what we're doing is we're becoming really disruptive to our thoughts and our behaviors and our patterns until we recreate, until we get to that space where we say, no, this is actually what I want to do. No, this is the way that I want to go. And I don't want to have to listen to everyone else. When I think back about my life and I think about the beliefs that were in my head, a lot of that belief that I wasn't good enough came from being mirrored in my external environment or directly from somebody else's mouth telling me that I was stupid. And so that's something that you have to really look at for yourself. And you have to begin to not believe it. And to not believe it, you have to not judge yourself for having it. So much goes into this, right? But your best bet is going to go through the TRN, the trigger response method, and take it from your trigger to your response. And then you get to react differently. And by doing that, you reprogram your patterns. You get to see a different way of moving forward. It's something that I think is really powerful. And it comes with also changing the relationship to your thoughts, not judging all the things that are coming into your mind, and also no longer trying to press it aside as if it shouldn't be there, because the thing is we can't control that. So if it's there, change your relationship to it. If it's there, how can you see it differently? Right? That's what we're looking to moving into. Have some compassion for yourself. Recognize that you've been this way for a reason and it supported you for as long as it could, but you are ready to break those patterns and you're ready to step into that different way of being and experiencing life. So I would absolutely love to know what you take away from this video. What are you working on? What are the insights you have, or what other questions does this bring up for you? And I'll drop all the links to make sure that you get that TRM so you can walk through it and begin to break those patterns. See you next time.